Welcome to today's explainer. All right, I want you to take a second and really think back to when you were a kid. You remember the absolute thrill of playing hide and seek, right? It's actually kind of crazy, but it's a game deeply rooted in our evolutionary history, like literally an ancient way for us to practice predator evasion in a controlled environment. Think about that rush of adrenaline when you squeezed yourself under a bed or crouched silently behind a tree just waiting in the dark. It was a game built entirely on the illusion of fear, safely contained within boundaries that everybody agreed upon. But today, we're going to look at what happens when those boundaries completely collapse. We are breaking down 3 documented accounts where an innocent game of hide-and-seek turned into an absolute nightmare. So let's dive right in.
Who else is hiding in the dark? I mean, it's a genuinely terrifying thought, right? We play these games operating on this massive assumption that we know exactly who is playing with us. But what if we're wrong? What if the person walking down the hall or moving through the trees isn't your friend at all? Well, that brings us to our first case file, which totally shatters that false sense of security in literally the one place you're supposed to feel the absolute safest, your own home.
All right, let's get into it. Section 1, the uninvited guest. Picture this. It's a late September Friday night. A 15-year-old boy is left home alone, so naturally, he invites his best friend Chris over. The parents aren't going to be back until way later, the house is totally empty, and the boys decide to turn out the lights and play a game of hide-and-seek, but they establish a very strict perimeter. Step 1, no going outside. Step 2, no attic or crawl space. Step 3, the basement, bedrooms, and closets are fair game. Do you see what they're doing here? They are drawing an invisible circle of safety around themselves. They are dictating the terms of their environment. But as we're about to see, setting rules doesn't mean a single thing if an uninvited guest just decides to break them.
So we're in the second round, and the narrator's hiding under the guest room bed. He hears these slow, heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. The shoes shuffle on the carpet, and they stop right next to the bed. The narrator later recalled, "I could hear him breathing as he walked into the guest room, then silence." Now, obviously, he assumes it's his friend Chris, but after minutes of this agonizing silence, he finally crawls out, goes downstairs, only to find Chris down in the basement. And Chris swears up and down he was never upstairs. In fact, Chris thought he heard breathing up there earlier too. So the boys argue, they brush it off, and eventually they just sit down in the living room to watch some TV.
And then, sitting right there on the couch, they hear it. A loud bump coming from upstairs, like something heavy just fell. The boys completely freeze. They try to rationalize it. Maybe the house is just settling, maybe something fell off a shelf, but then comes the absolute unmistakable sound of a slow creak of floorboards. Someone is walking down the upstairs hallway. In an instant, their safe childhood home has become hostile territory, and they have no choice but to investigate.
So the boys creep up the stairs, and they're armed with nothing but a fireplace poker. Every single step they take groans under their weight. When they finally reach the top, they see the guest room door, which, by the way, was previously cracked open, is now shut completely tight. And then comes the most chilling detail. From behind that closed door, they hear this slow, dragging noise, like heavy fabric sliding right across the carpet. They yank the door open, nothing. They check the closet, totally empty. So they let out this shaky laugh, thinking, okay, maybe we're just being completely paranoid.
But literally right at that moment, they hear a sound from downstairs. The front door opens and closes. Someone was inside the house with them. They hear faint footsteps moving on the first floor and heading down into the basement. The boys use that tiny fleeting window of time to sprint out the back door and run straight to Chris's house to call the cops. The authorities show up, they search the home top to bottom, and they find absolutely nothing. No forced entry, no one hiding in the basement, just this massive, unsolved mystery of who is hiding in the house, breathing in the dark, and playing a sick game right alongside them.
Moving on to our next case. Section 2, Whispers in the Woods.
All right, so we shift scenes to a really hot, humid August night. 5 friends are playing hide-and-seek in a neighborhood that backs up into these massive, deep woods. Now, the rules for this game are a bit different. Because it's pitch black out there, the entire game relies on auditory cues. You have to stay close enough to hear the seeker actually shout that the round is over. Sound is quite literally their only lifeline to safety. But think about it. When you're relying entirely on sound in the dark, every single snapping twig or crunching leaf takes on a terrifying significance.
So, the narrator is crouching behind this fallen log just past the tree line. He hears the seeker, Jason, counting off in the distance. Then, he hears footsteps crunching through the leaves, moving between the trees.
The narrator holds his breath, totally thinking it's Jason, but the heavy footsteps stop just a few feet away. Whoever it is just stands there, perfectly still in the pitch black. Finally, the steps crunch deeper into the woods. And here's the kicker. When the round ends, the narrator finds out Jason never even entered the woods.
The boys keep playing, basically dismissing it as an animal, which is what we all do, right? But the narrator makes a mental note that the steps were way too heavy to be a raccoon or a deer. Fast forward to the final round of the night. Crouching in the tall grass right at the edge of the woods, the narrator hears something that freezes him completely to the core. He said it was whispering, a low voice too soft to make out the words, but it was close. He peeks over the grass, but he sees absolutely nothing. Just footsteps moving past him into the trees. When the game finally ends, the friends all gather in the yard. The narrator tries to tell them about the whisper, but they just laugh it off. And then, one of the younger boys, Matt, speaks up. He's covered in dirt from hiding, and he quietly asks if anyone else noticed the man. Matt claims that, while he was hiding, he saw a tall man standing motionless in the dark woods, just watching them play. No way, right? It's a chilling confirmation that those heavy footsteps and the whispers were very, very real. They were sharing the dark with a watcher.
Which brings us to our final account. Section 3, The Stranger Named Keith.
Okay, so it's a July afternoon in rural Pennsylvania. 4 14-year-old boys are just hanging out playing basketball when a total stranger walks up their dirt road. He looks to be about 16, and weirdly, he's wearing a gray shirt and jeans in the sweltering summer heat. He introduces himself as Keith, claiming he lives just up the road. When they invite him to play basketball, he refuses. Instead, he suggests a game of manhunt, which, if you don't know, is basically a massive, sprawling version of hide and seek. But here's the most alarming detail. He casually mentions that the narrator's yard is perfect for it. Stop and think about that. How would a complete stranger know the layout of a private, rural property? But the boys, just looking to have a good time, completely ignore the red flags and agree to play.
From there, the escalation happens incredibly fast. They start playing in the afternoon, with Keith absolutely insisting on being the seeker. But by sunset, Keith simply vanishes. He doesn't say goodbye, he doesn't call off the game, he just straight up disappears from the property. The friends eventually call it a day and leave. Later that evening, the narrator steps outside and finds something genuinely terrifying right outside his bedroom window. A dirty, weathered piece of rope that absolutely was not there earlier that day.
The narrator tries to push the fear down and just goes to bed. But at 11 p.m., while he's scrolling on his phone in the dark, he hears something inside the house. He remembers thinking, soft footsteps outside my door? This was quiet, too quiet. He knows exactly what his dad's heavy footsteps sound like, and this was someone else. Panic sets in. He locks his bedroom door. And then, 30 seconds later, he hears the front door of the house slam shut.
So at 11 p.m., the narrator runs and wakes his dad, who grabs a shotgun and searches the entire house and the surrounding property, but they find nothing. By 11:30 p.m., they go into full lockdown mode, locking every single door and window. The house is a total fortress. You'd think it's over, right? But at 2 a.m., the narrator is woken up again. This time, by a slow, deliberate scratching sound dragging right across his bedroom window glass. The predator had returned, even after the lockdown.
Unable to stop himself, the narrator reaches out and bends a single window blind down just to peek outside. And standing right there on the other side of the glass, literally just inches away in the pitch black, is the silhouette of a figure. The narrator screams. His dad runs out with a shotgun, firing 2 warning rounds into the night sky, screaming into the dark. The figure vanishes. They never saw Keith ever again. But man, that rope left by the window leaves a sickening question of what he intended to do if the narrator hadn't woken up.
All right, let's wrap this up. Section 4, the chilling takeaway. We've got 3 totally different environments and 3 different games, but they all share a really terrifying connective tissue. In the childhood home, the threat was an unseen intruder, and the warning sign was the dragging fabric and those unnatural sounds. Out in the deep woods, it was a silent watcher, signaled by heavy whispers and footsteps that just didn't match the players. And in the rural backyard, it became an active stalker, prefaced by the discovery of a weathered rope. In every single one of these scenarios, an absolutely crucial red flag was presented to the victims before the true horror actually revealed itself.
And this brilliantly illustrates why all of this matters to you and me. First off, we rely so heavily on false rules of safety. We think just because a door is locked or because we agreed on game boundaries that a predator is somehow going to respect them. Second, we constantly dismiss our own sensory warnings. Think about how quickly they said, oh, it's just the house settling, or it's probably just an animal. Our brains desperately try to rationalize real danger away just to maintain a false sense of comfort. And finally, we assume everyone hiding in the dark is part of our game.
These stories are proof that the dark really doesn't care about your rules. So here's what I want you to think about. Next time you hear a random creak in the hallway or a rustle in the leaves outside your window, before you just brush it off as the wind, are you absolutely sure you are playing alone? Thank you so much for joining me for today's Explainer. Stay safe out there and, maybe pay a little more attention to the dark.